Hey everyone, you're listening to the Shared Cup podcast. This is episode 1, where you are going to hear a heartfelt message from Virginia Depp, where she went from the top of the world to the bottom of the pit in 6 minutes flat, and how she ultimately overcame and was able to see God's hand in all of it. I'm Alison Liddic, and this podcast is for women who want to experience the overflowing love of God through our own stories. We pray that you are blessed by this message. Well, hello, and thank you for listening to our show today. Today I have a very special guest, Virginia Depp. Thank you for being here, Virginia.
Honored to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I am honored to have you. Virginia is a public speaker. She has been speaking for over 25 years. Is that right?
Yes, I'm old.
Oh, stop. So to all different sizes of groups and different audiences, I know you've been doing this for a long time and you are very talented. So I'm honored to have you here.
Well, thank you. I said this is the first time I've ever done something without an audience, and so I hope that I'm able to connect. I love to speak to groups, and I get a lot of energy from the audience, and so this is very different. So you're going to have to give me a lot of energy today.
Okay. All right. No pressure for me. I know it is very different when you're used to being on a stage or having a group of people in front of you to sit down and just stare at a screen and try to get that same type of vibe that you're used to. But
yeah,
it'll just be you and me chatting, you know.
Hey, this is a new way we do things. We've got to be flexible, right?
That's right. So thanks for being on. And really the focus of the shows that we do is to encourage women going through all different types of things. So, you know, it can be mother related, work related. It doesn't really matter, but we just focus on that and how God has been working in those different situations as well. So your story, or one of them, is pretty incredible. And I would like you, if you could, first, let's get to know you a little bit more, like a little bit about Virginia, family, and where you're from and all that, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I am Virginia Depp, and I have been a business owner for almost 18 years and closed our business at the end of 2019. And so now I am really pursuing my passion of public speaking outside of corporate and more really with women's retreats. I can speak at corporations and different things, but really just sharing a message of hope and encouragement to people. I was I guess in high school when I took public speaking, I can tell you that I hated speech class, and I still get nervous, even though I have been speaking for 25 years. And prior to owning a business, I did a lot more public speaking and then kind of transitioned into corporate. But I'm really passionate about giving hope and encouragement through the stories of my life. And so even though I can still get really nervous, that passion drives me to do it more. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and just I'm so excited about what you're doing, Alison. I just think what a great venue to give women to speak hope and encouragement to other people, which we've needed all of our life, but especially at a time like this. So
right.
I'm proud of you too for
thank you.
stepping up.
Yes, it's something that we all need, and it's so hard to find sometimes, right? Like the negative stuff can be on the forefront. So I appreciate you as well joining in this effort to really spread hope to women out there. So thank you.
Well,
so,
you did ask. Oh, so sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
You did ask a little bit about me, and I will tell you I have a degree in psychology, and I have been married almost 30 years, and have I got stories about that. And as I said, I was a business owner for 18 years, and I also am a mother of 3 children, and that kind of sums up my heart. My passion is a lot of my life experiences have come from really all those avenues, whether it was business, marriage, and especially my children, which I think everyone can relate to. We all have a life lesson from our children.
Yeah, we do.
Daily.
That's very true. And you have a little dog too, or grand dog, right?
I have a grand dog. I had a dog for 14 years, and I'm actually on the pursuit of finding the perfect dog. And I have not done that yet. But my daughter has a dog, and we have borrowed her during quarantine just to keep us happy and busy.
That's good. That's good. And what does the perfect dog look like for you? Do you
I'm
know?
not sure. I'm really not, but I know it's out there. It's probably small. It doesn't shed. It doesn't bark a lot. Likes to be held. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not really sure, but those are just some of the qualities.
Well, if anyone listening knows of a dog that fits that criteria, put it in the
Yeah.
comments or send Virginia a message because we need to get her that perfect dog.
We do.
Let's dive into the story. So, if we could, I want to go way back. How many years ago?
This was probably 24 years ago.
So, if you don't mind, just jumping right in wherever you feel like is a good start for the story. And we'll go from there.
Well, as I said, I feel like a lot of the lessons that I have learned in life have come from my children. And I think all of us, especially, every person has defining moments in their life. And they can be times where somebody said something and it defined an idea for you. And that's another podcast we can do.
Right.
But there's also life events that occur that really can shape us and transform us. And that happened for me, 24 years ago with the birth of my second child. I had a little boy that was 2, and his name is Josh. And when he was 2, we brought our second baby home, and her name is Maddie, or Madison, and we call her Maddie, and she's also the mother of the dog that I have. So but when Maddie was born, we brought her home from the hospital, and we're just so thankful. And I really thought the truck was going to pull up any day and start installing that white picket fence, because I really thought I just had it all. And I can remember driving in my car, and it was a day probably like it is here, a spring day. The sun was out. I might have even been able to roll down the window a little bit. And I had one child in a car seat, the other in the car seat. And I said out loud, God, I just can't imagine my life being any more perfect than this. And I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way about your life, but I truly thought, I just love my life and I am so blessed. And it wasn't long after that, I noticed and had noticed for some time that my sweet little baby seemed to struggle whenever I would go to nurse her, and she would kind of choke a little bit. And I remember even at her birth questioning that in the hospital. And they assured us that that was typical baby gurgles and snorts, and, kind of brushed it aside. And so when I took her for one of her checkups, I questioned the pediatrician and expressed those concerns. And she assured me that my baby was fine, but also said, you know what, if you're really concerned, we can schedule a CAT scan on your baby, and, we'll schedule it out a few weeks and we can just check things out. And so for most mothers, I think you might freak out with that, but my son had a sinus infection. So I told you he was 2, and I freaked out because she said, let's have a CAT scan on him. And I was calling everybody, what if he has a brain tumor? What if, just all these concerns. And he was absolutely fine, had a sinus infection. So when my baby was told that we were going to do that, I was kind of like, this is who my doctor is, and we're going to do that. And I honestly think she scheduled the CAT scan several weeks out, thinking that my new mom nerves and concerns would maybe subside and we wouldn't have that happen. But actually, when she was 4 weeks old, we did take her and she did have a CAT scan. And I was told to call the doctor the next day and get the result. So I remember it as clearly as if I was there today. It was leave day. I had called the doctor several times, and finally the receptionist said, you know what, just call us at 4 o'clock today after the office closes. The doctor will have plenty of time to talk to you, and you'll be sure to reach her. And so this was actually 24 years ago, and I didn't have a cell phone, and most people didn't have a cell phone. And so I remember asking my next door neighbor who had a cell phone if I could borrow his cell phone for the weekend. And that sounds so strange to me today. But he didn't need a cell phone because he just used it for work. And so he was like, yeah, take my cell phone. And the reason I was borrowing it is because my family had planned a trip to go to a farm in Kentucky. And it was very isolated. There was no television. There was no telephone. It was just a really secluded, wonderful, relaxing place. But I was concerned that I was taking an virtually 4-week-old baby and my 2-year-old. And I wanted to, of course, have some kind of telephone communication. And so we decided to leave on the trip, and I would use this cell phone at 4 o'clock to call the pediatrician to get the results. And again, they had reassured me time and time again that it was, probably just a sinus infection, not a big deal, and to go on my way. Mm-hmm. And so I remember it very clearly, 4 o'clock, neon lights on the dashboard of the car. I picked up the phone and I dialed the doctor. And when the doctor came on the phone, she asked me, she said, Mrs. Depp, are you driving? And I said, no. And she said, good, because I've already called your husband and he was at work and going to join me at the farm later after work. I've already called him. He's left work. He's on his way to get you. But you need to come home, and you need to have your baby at the hospital tomorrow at 6 a.m. for an MRI. And I said, an MRI? What, is there something wrong with my baby's nose? And she said, no, Mrs. Depp, I'm sorry. There's something wrong with your baby's brain. And in that moment, I felt like I fell from the top of the world to the bottom of the deepest pit. And I talked to her briefly for a few more minutes, and she just encouraged me to keep going to the farm that I was going to, and that my husband would meet me. And I later got my neighbor's cell phone records, and I saw that we had had a 6-minute conversation. And I realized at that moment, it only takes 6 minutes to get from the top of the world to the bottom of the deepest pit.
Wow.
And so as I looked up from this telephone call, there were people walking on I-75, which if you're from this area, that's one of the largest interstates there is. And I thought, what in the world is going on? My world has just plummeted, and there are people on I-75 walking all along. And what had happened is there was a crane that had collapsed across I-75 going both north and southbound. And it was actually one of the largest traffic jams in the history of I-75. It's in the newspaper and everything. And so I just remember not knowing what to do. And we rerouted down different highways and side roads, and no traffic was moving. The phone didn't work any longer. I didn't even know how to call out on it, because back then you had to know like the roaming station tower number. And right. My husband didn't have a cell phone, so there was no way to reach him. And I can just remember feeling really stuck, really isolated, and really alone.
Wow. So how did you get out of that place?
So the really cool thing again is, and again, throughout this, I just see that God always places people along your path. And so as we are creeping down the interstate or the side road, moving at a snail's pace, and what should have taken 2 hours to get home took me 12 hours. So it was 4 in the morning. And when I got home, my husband still wasn't home, and we still hadn't spoken to each other. And so when I did finally catch up with my husband and he did get home, we sent my son, who was 2, to stay with my parents who would keep him, knowing that we would be at the hospital at 6 a.m. for the MRI. And little did I know that when I sent my son to stay with my mom, he wouldn't return to my house for at least 7 days. And when he did return to our home, it wasn't the same home he left, and it never, ever would be again. And you see, we sang, "If You're Happy and You Know It," and we sang, "You Are My Sunshine." And after you've been in the pit, and when you're experiencing something really, really hard, it's really hard to sing those songs again. And so
Right.
our life completely changed. Our family's life changed. Our distant relatives' lives changed. And it entered us into a really, really trying time. So we did go for the MRI, and I remember afterwards they took us in and put the scans up on the screen, and they said, "Do you see this? This is your baby's brainstem. And this looks really good. And do you see this? This is her cerebellum, and that looks really good. And do you see this big black space right up here all along the top? Uh-huh. Well, that's supposed to be your baby's corpus callosum, and your baby never developed a corpus callosum, so she's missing that part of her brain." And I remember saying, "Well, what does the corpus callosum do?" And she got out a textbook and she opened it and she started telling us the exact condition that our daughter had. And it was called a basal encephalocele agenesis of the corpus callosum, and ended up eventually learning she also had morning glory syndrome. And when we learn this, basically your brain is surrounded by a sac of fluid, and around the sac of fluid is your skull. And so when my baby was about 4 weeks, when I was about 4 weeks pregnant, when her skull was forming, there was an opening that was left in the base of her skull. And so the sac of fluid that surrounds her brain was dipping down into her sinus cavity, which is what made her sound like she was kind of
Wow.
great. And typically this is not really found. It's kind of a form of spina bifida, except people that have spina bifida have the opening at the base of their spine. This was inside between her eyes. And so as they're describing this condition to me and my husband, they say, "These children rarely survive surgery. And if they do, they spend their life severely retarded." And so we learned this. It was also a Friday when this was happening, and so most surgeons were gone. It wasn't like we could go the next day to find out. So we really had a weekend of kind of just not knowing. But my pediatrician, again, that I had spoke to the day before, had asked me to come to her office and stop by with the baby after we got the results. And so when I walked into the pediatrician's office, I knew that our life was completely different, because all the nurses in the pediatric office usually would greet us and be all happy, and they couldn't look me in the eye. And so you realize that pits are hard. And when our friends or people that we know are in pits, sometimes it's really difficult to know what to say. And so we're scared and afraid. And I was that person. I understand. I was the girl at the white picket fence house. So if somebody was going through something difficult, it made it really challenging for me because I couldn't relate. And so I knew then that life had radically changed, and it would continue to do so for quite some time. And we went in to see our pediatrician, and she explained how sorry she was. And then she said, "I just really want to encourage you to not go put your house on the market today. There's lots of agencies that can help you with the financial burden of raising a child with a severe disability." When I was leaving, I said to her, "Can you just tell me what to do? Like, just tell me what to do." And she looked at me and she said, "Take your baby home and love her, because she will probably die." And so
Wow.
we went home, and people came to our home and hooked her up to machines. and different things that would let us know if, I guess they were afraid that she might have difficulty getting air. They talked about maybe her getting a tracheotomy at some point, all this information, but they said, just, we're going to put her on this machine. And, this is my first baby girl. And you've got to know,
Right.
I had outfits from one end of the closet to the other. And they said, you probably don't want to even dress her. You just put her in a onesie or a nightshirt type thing, because it's just going to get the cords all messed up. And I just remember walking into the bathroom crying and looking at myself in the mirror and just saying, suck it up, girl. Like, this is your life. Like, you have got to get it together. And realizing that I couldn't mourn the pink, fuzzy, cute outfit that I had dreamed about putting her in. And so it all seems so trivial now, but it was so real. And I just remember that being a real moment of reckoning with what we were dealt with.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned it before that the doctors didn't really see that there was an issue. You were the one that caught on to that. What do you think that was? Like, where do you think that came from? Besides the physical things you were seeing, did you know deep down?
I think, honestly, when she was born, my husband and I both noticed things in the hospital. I remember right after her birth asking the nurse if she was okay. And the nurse saying, understanding when I said, is she okay? And the way I said it, she knew what I was asking. And she said, yes. Why would any mother ask that about her baby? And I felt very shamed by that. Almost like, what kind of mother are you?
Yeah.
And I can honestly say, I truly believe that God gave us that knowing. And I think it's a gift he gives all mothers and parents in general, is many times with our children, whether they're babies or adults, we just know. We know, and we have that. And even as this continued to progress, we would take her to specialists and different people all over. And many times they would just be looking at this beautiful little doll baby, and they would say, what made you question it? How did you know? Because there isn't anything on the outside that you could look at and not say, this is the most beautiful little baby I've ever seen. And I
Yeah.
still think that. So, and every mother should.
Right.
So, yeah, that was really hard. And so that started us down a path of, again, this was 24 years ago. So there wasn't internet for me to just go Google or talk to my
Right.
phone and ask Siri what the answer was, which was probably a good thing, for me and how I'm wired. But we, had made the commitment. We would have gone anywhere in the world to get her, as any parent would, whatever they needed for your child. And it just so happened that God put the best person for her and the best surgeon at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, which is one of the top children's hospitals in the world. And the weird thing about her diagnosis is it wasn't like a heart surgery where you say, oh, my child has a heart defect. Well, I need to go to Michigan, or I need to go to the Cleveland Clinic to have this done. Or this is, some other specialty, and I know right where to go. We're going to go to Johns Hopkins. They've got it. They know the plan. The doctor's there. This was something no one was familiar with. And so we went to the first surgeon at a different hospital, and they said, I'm going to give her an ear-to-ear incision. I'm going to go down through her head, and I'm going to sever her pituitary gland. So she's going to need hormone therapy the rest of her life. And I don't know any woman out there who, I'm like, we have enough problems with our hormones. Do you really want a teenage daughter that you have got to give her hormones? Oh my, this is a problem.
Right.
And so they said, we're going to sever her olfactory nerve so your baby will never smell. And your baby will most likely, if she survives the surgery, she will never be able to look at a bird and tell you it's a bird. And so that was what we were dealing with. And when you're dealt that, you just deal with it, right? And so we went to Children's in Cincinnati, and we found a surgeon who had actually done this surgery before. And he had developed a technique where he was going to go through the roof of our baby's mouth, and he would not sever her olfactory nerve or her pituitary gland, and he would be able to use the roof of her mouth to seal the hole in her skull. And then
Wow.
her mouth would come back. And so that sounded like a much better plan. And again, God just led us there. It was his hand guiding us and directing us. And so we decided that that was the best avenue for our family. And it ended up that Maddie, our daughter, is the youngest person in the world to have ever had this procedure done. And she still is to this day. She is out in the Pediatric Journal of Neurosurgery. And just a few years ago, they reran the article. And so she's still the youngest to have ever had that done. And, for me, we talk about defining moments. I would say that the hospital stay was one of the most life-changing for my husband and I, and just really our whole perspective of life as we knew it changed during that time. And I would love to tell about it, but I know it's kind of a long story, so I don't know how much time we have, Al.
Why don't we do maybe a part 2 where we can dive into the hospital story? I don't want to cut it short. That's the thing, and it's so powerful.
Something that I think I can share that maybe relates to disappointed parents and what we're going through right now is, I talked about going into the bathroom and saying to myself, suck it up, this is your life. And some of us have had to do that, haven't we, already, with just this virus that's going on and the disappointments that we've had. And this isn't a new story with me, but I really could relate to it and where I was at that place in my life. And it's called Welcome to Holland. And I'm not going to read it, but it's I think a good analogy. At least it's a great way of explaining that place where I was. And it talks about when you're planning your baby and your the excitement of having a child, and it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Paris, and you go by guidebooks and you learn some sayings in French, and you figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to see and all the wonderful things about Paris. And so you get ready to go and you climb on the airplane and you've packed your bags and you head off and you're so excited. And then when you land, the airline stewardess comes on and says, well, I'm here to say welcome to Holland. And you say, Holland? I'm supposed to be in Paris. I learned French. I've got my list of everything I'm going to see and all the exciting things I'm going to do. And all my friends are in Paris. And I'm in Holland. I don't know anything about Holland. And then you stop and you realize Holland's not a terrible place. Holland is not filled with pestilence and disease.
Right.
Holland has tulips. Holland has windmills. Holland has really good food. But that's how it is for many of us. Even right now, as I have a senior this year in high school, and I talk to many parents who are experiencing hey, I've been on this plane and I have been waiting to reach this destination. And this is not what it's supposed to look like. This was not in the guidebooks. This is not at all what I planned. And I've been looking forward to this trip for a really long time. And so I think whether it's a high school senior or a college graduation or where your business was going or the season in sports you were planning to have or the wedding that you had planned, we all know, if we've lived any minute of our life, that these things happen, that there are disappointments, and we can focus on the whole time of what we're missing out on. My daughter today, we should have been in Arizona for a mother-daughter trip for a senior year.
Oh,
She said, Mom, we should be on the plane right now. And I could sit here all week and reminisce about what spa we were going to, what the Grand Canyon was supposed to look like, what we were doing. And that's okay to give it a minute. And I'm certainly not saying that you stuff stuff and don't deal with what it is. But then there comes a moment where you have to look yourself in the mirror maybe and say, suck it up. This is life. And how am I going to proceed to find the windmills and the tulips?
yeah.
And the great thing for me, and I think for so many of us as believers that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, his word says, I will work all things together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest promise that through this whole pandemic that I have been able to hold on to and my family has gotten so much strength from is, I'm not on a girls' trip in, the desert, but I have had a lot of really great quality time with my daughter and my husband and our family unit. And so I'm looking for the windmills and tulips. And
Yeah.
I'm finding a lot of really, really positive things, even in the midst of some disappointments. And I also know that this too will pass, and that there's so many other wonderful things ahead that we can't even see. But this pandemic, it caught me by surprise, but it certainly did not catch God by surprise. And he promises
Amen.
he will work it for our good. And we just have to believe that, embrace that, and really seek that and say, God, I'm struggling today. I am so down and disappointed. I've just got to get your view on things. And he'll give you his view, but you have to ask. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot in the asking and in just the faith to believe that God will see you through. And that's why I wanted to share my story today. And it's a long story, my goodness, but I love to share it because for me, it does show God's faithfulness. And it doesn't mean everything that happens is good and great and fabulous. It just means that God will make good, great, and fabulous out of so many things and in so many ways that we never expected. And I can't wait to come back and share the rest of her story and our story. But I will leave you with just the thought for right now is look for the tulips, look for the windmills, and find the good and seek God in finding that, because the story, it didn't end at the surgery, and there's so much good. And honestly, I wouldn't change a day of what happened. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I wouldn't change it because of the good that it did in my life and my family's life, and the good that I hope it'll bring to your life by encouraging you and giving you hope when you might find yourself in a pit like I did.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that analogy that you gave about Holland.
Well,
I
it's not
mean, it's
original with me.
well, that's okay. I hadn't heard it. And it's so relevant to, like you said, the time we're going through now, but to your situation as well, just planning and expecting this one thing and getting something completely different,
Yep.
but being able to see. I love that so much. And knowing, like you said, God's promise for us that he will work everything for our good. So that's great. Well, I hate that we're out of time because I would love to keep going and hear the rest of the story. But we will do a part 2.
Sure.
Because I'm sure the listeners are dying to know what happened after the surgery. So would you be willing to do a part 2?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, we'll schedule that, but I would love to be able to share the rest of your story with our listeners.
Well,
But thank you again.
thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Virginia, if people wanted to book you to speak, Now, I know it might be a bit until we're out of quarantine currently, unless you do more of
Oh,
stuff like this online, which I know is different.
yeah.
But if they wanted to find you to reach out to book you to speak or get information, how do they find you online?
Right now, the best way to do that is simply through Facebook. And I have a Facebook page. It's not my personal Facebook, it is my speaking Facebook page. And you can just search Virginia Depp on Facebook, and you should be able to find it there.
Okay, perfect. So it's Virginia Depp, DEPP, and I'll put it in the contact
Okay.
or in the comments below as well.
Yeah.
But perfect. Well, thank you again, Virginia. It was a pleasure. I thank you for sharing your story with everyone. Hopefully, I'm sure it has blessed someone's life today. And we can't wait to hear the rest of the story.
Sounds good. Thanks,
All
Alison.
right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you hear and know of upcoming episodes. And let us know if you have ideas or topics that you want us to cover. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you again so much to Virginia Depp for sharing this very personal story with us about her baby Maddie. Make sure you join us next week where we're going into part 2 of this story with Virginia Depp, where we can learn more about what happened with Maddie and also about that life-changing story of what happened in the hospital room. Thank you for joining us today for the Shared Cup podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you know anyone that can benefit from hearing this podcast, please share it. Also, if you have a story that you think could touch others, comment below and we'll send you the link to apply to be a guest. Thank you again and have a blessed day.